Here we can see a group of pickers where they have chosen the method to separate the unripes by going through, picking as much as they can without any sorting during the picking, and then prior to weighing, they will then lay it out on a plastic sheet and then start to sort out the really unripes. They will pick out the semi-ripes, which you can see in the green basket, and then they will leave the ripe ones on the blue basket. So after we finish picking, we'll truck the cherries to the wet mill, we'll weigh it, we'll always calibrate the scale before we do, make sure everything's okay. Then we'll be emptying out the sacks one by one, making sure that we don't have any excess unripes or green cherries, also making sure we don't have any large rocks or twigs or too many leaves that can clog up the system. Also allows us to have a good overview of the day's picking, see how even it was, level of maturity of the cherries. Once we're ready to get started, we'll use the recycled water to essentially push the cherries into the next stage inside the wet mill, and the water does all the work for us. Once the cherries fall through inside the wet mill, they go into the receiving part of the auger that will raise the cherries to the siphon, and from the siphon through the rest of the process to the fermentation tank. Everything is done by gravity. So after the cherries are sucked up by the siphon, the water will push them to the depulpers, where the depulpers will squeeze the cherry, separating the bean from the fruit, which the fruit is then discarded and the seed continues on to the criba. What this does is it sorts the beans by size to make sure that the good beans will go through it, sink, and the ones that are too large or the pulp that may have come through will be processed as second-grade coffees. In the fermentation tank, the beans will stay overnight, sometimes up to 36 hours, allowing the mucilage to ferment and then be washed off. Once the beans are pumped to the beginning of the washing channel, it falls through the adelio, which is basically a graded system that separates water from the beans. And the seeds fall down into the caño colombiano, which will help separate the floaters, and they will be pushed to the final washer. The mechanical washer will basically use friction to make sure that all the mucilage is completely off. And once the beans come out of the mechanical washer, that is our only injection point of fresh water in the entire system. In the final rinsing, the beans are then pushed into the distribution carts that we have. The workers will then distribute these beans, which in essence are wet parchment, onto the drying patios. Once the wet parchment is distributed onto the patio, it's here for usually a minimum of 7 to 8 days, and sometimes can take as long as 2 weeks. And during this process, we are constantly raking it to make sure it's getting sunlight and wind to remove all the excess humidity, which is when we finally pick it up off the patio into sacks and put it into the warehouse.